Captain Daniel Whitmore slammed his fist on the map table and laughed, actually laughed in Sergeant Olivia Carter's face. "You're seeing ghosts, Carter. Shadows and nothing else." Around him, other officers joined in. Snickers, eye rolls. One man muttered something under his breath that made two others smirk. Olivia stood there, her intelligence report in hand. Her warnings ignored her, voice erased, while 480 Marines were already loading into vehicles. Heading straight toward the valley she had spent 3 weeks proving was a death trap. And nobody cared. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow Olivia's story all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell us what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The report had taken Olivia Carter 22 days to build. 22 days of satellite imagery, cross-referenced topographical maps, historical ambush data going back 15 years, intercept analysis and pattern recognition work that she had done largely alone, largely in silence, largely without anyone asking her to. She had not been assigned this project. Nobody told her to spend her evenings rebuilding a three-dimensional mental model of Black Ridge Valley using nothing but publicly available terrain data and her own obsessive attention to detail. Nobody asked her to correlate the movement signatures she had noticed in the Eastern Ridgeline photos from the drone sweeps with attack patterns from similar canyon engagements in previous years. She had done it because something about the mission briefing made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up and refuse to lie flat. That feeling, that specific bone-deep wrongness, was something Olivia had learned not to ignore. She had learned it the hard way in the kind of classroom that doesn't issue diplomas. So she built the report. She checked it 4 times, she printed it, organized it, tabbed the most critical sections with yellow markers, and walked it personally to the operations room on the morning of March the 9th, 48 hours before the convoy was scheduled to move. The operations room smelled like burnt coffee and dry erase markers. 3 officers were already inside when she knocked and entered. Captain Daniel Whitmore stood at the central map table with his arms crossed, talking to Lieutenant Colonel Frank Garrison and Major Pete Solis. All 3 of them turned when she came in. Whitmore looked at the folder in her hand and then looked at her face. Something in his expression shifted slightly, not into curiosity, but into the particular kind of tolerant patience a person uses when they have already decided not to be impressed. "Sergeant Carterman," he said, "what do you have?" "Sir, I need about 10 minutes of your time." She set the folder on the table and opened it. "I've been running analysis on the planned route through Black Ridge Valley. I believe the operation as currently designed carries a level of risk that hasn't been fully accounted for in the mission brief." The room was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then Major Solis said, "What kind of risk?" "Ambush risk, sir. Significant ambush risk." Olivia spread the first map across the table. The valley is approximately 4 kilometers long and narrows to less than 200 meters at its midpoint. The ridge lines on both the eastern and western walls rise to an average of 340 feet above the valley floor. Any unit moving through that corridor during that constriction period is operating in a natural kill zone. Lieutenant Colonel Garrison leaned forward slightly. He was looking at the map with the particular squint of a man who was trying to decide whether to take something seriously. Whitmore didn't lean forward. "Sergeant Carter," he said, and his voice had taken on that particular tone, measured slightly condescending, the tone that teachers use when a student gives an answer that technically isn't wrong, but also isn't what they wanted. Every canyon in southern Arizona is a potential kill zone under the right circumstances. That doesn't mean there's an active threat in this one. "Sir, I understand that. What I'm pointing to isn't general terrain risk. I'm pointing to specific indicators." She flipped to the next tab section. 3 weeks ago, a drone sweep of the eastern ridge captured what initially looked like rock formation shadows in the afternoon light. I pulled the same sweep from 6 months earlier. The shadows weren't there 6 months ago. Garrison's squint deepened. "What are you saying caused them?" "Prepared fighting positions, sir, dug-in camouflage machine gun nests. Based on the profile and spacing, I'm estimating a minimum of 4 positions on the eastern ridge, possibly 6. The western ridge has different signatures. The vegetation, disturbance patterns suggest mortar placements." The room went very quiet. Olivia pressed on because quiet rooms had never frightened her. "I also pulled engagement data from 7 similar corridor ambushes over the last 12 years, sir. In every single case, the tactical setup shared 3 defining characteristics with what I'm seeing in Black Ridge Valley: the canyon geometry, the elevation advantage of the attacking force, and what I'm calling pre-positioning signatures in the days before a friendly unit was scheduled to pass through. She looked up from the map. 3 officers were looking back at her. Garrison was still squinting, but now he'd uncrossed his arms. Solis was chewing the inside of his cheek. Whitmore had not moved. "Where did you get this?" Garrison asked. "I built it myself, sir. The drone footage is from our own reconnaissance library. The historical engagement data is from the Joint Lessons Learned database. Everything in that folder is sourced and can be verified." A long pause followed. Then Whitmore said, "Sergeant Carter, you're a scout and a marksman. You are not an intelligence analyst." The words landed with the particular weight of a door being closed in someone's face. Olivia kept her voice level. She had practiced keeping her voice level in rooms like this one. "Sir, I'm not presenting this as an intelligence product. I'm presenting it as a threat assessment from someone who has spent 3 weeks looking very closely at this specific piece of terrain. I could be wrong, I accept that. But I believe the risk is real enough that I'm asking the operation be delayed until we can get additional reconnaissance assets to verify or rule out what I'm seeing." Whitmore looked at her for a long moment. Then the corner of his mouth curved upward. It was not a warm smile. "Sergeant," he said, "you've been staring through a scope so long, you've started seeing armies in the shadows. That's a hazard of the job." He glanced at Solis and something passed between them. "I appreciate your thoroughness. The mission proceeds as planned." And that was it. That was the entire conversation. Olivia gathered her folder from the table. She did it carefully, precisely the way she did everything. She thanked the officers for their time. She walked out of the operations room with her back straight and the report under her arm, and the single, very clear thought in her mind that she had now officially done everything she was supposed to do. She had seen the danger. She had reported it through proper channels. She had been dismissed. What happened next would not be her fault. She told herself that all the way back to the barracks. She wasn't sure she believed it. Olivia Carter had grown up in Salinas, California, the second youngest of 4 children, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at a county hospital and still somehow managed to read to her kids every night before bed. Her father had left when she was 7. She didn't talk about that much. What she did talk about, what she would talk about with anyone who asked, was her grandfather, a former Army sergeant named Earl Carter, who had served in Vietnam and come home with 2 things, a Purple Heart and an absolutely unshakable belief that the most important skill a person in a dangerous situation could develop was the ability to read terrain. She went up the ladder and he watched her go, and he noticed how she climbed. She tested every 3rd rung with her weight before she put her hand on it. She never looked down. And when she got near the top, she stopped and she looked east and then north and then northwest, and she stayed there for maybe 15 seconds, looking at nothing at all, and then she went up the rest of the way. Cole knew what she'd been doing. She was reading the wind by watching the dust on a ridgeline 4 miles away. He went back to the shade and got Rennick. "Sir, before you start." "I'm not going to start. I'm going to tell you one thing and then we're going to work." Cole leaned against the wall. "You've been in 11 years. 12. 12. In 12 years, how many people have you met who could shut down a 50-man laugh by kneeling down and picking something up?" Rennick didn't answer. "Because I've been in 19 and the answer is 2, and the other one's dead." Cole pushed off the wall. "Get your team on the East Berm. Convoy's moving." The convoy was moving. She joined the Marines at 22. Her mother cried. Her older brother called it the best decision she'd ever made. Her younger sister, who was studying pre-law at UC Davis, sent her a care package full of protein bars and a handwritten note that said, "Come home safe and come home whole." Olivia had come home safe from 2 deployments. Whole was a more complicated question. She had applied for sniper school after her first deployment. The rejection had been polite and brief. She applied again after her second deployment with a service record that any reasonable evaluator would have found impressive. That rejection was also polite and brief. The unofficial reason she heard through channels was that she was considered too independent, too stubborn, too willing to challenge the judgment of superiors when she thought they were wrong. She had considered that feedback for a long time. She had decided that she considered it a compliment. She had also decided that the best response to being told you're too independent was to become so undeniably competent that independence stopped being a conversation. She had spent the last 3 years doing exactly that. Her shooting record at the regimental level was extraordinary. Her threat assessment calls and training exercises had a success rate that her unit's evaluation officer had described in writing as statistically anomalous. She had twice identified actual security gaps during operations that her chain of command had initially dismissed and later been forced to acknowledge. In Whitmore's briefing room, she had been doing the exact same thing. And the role had been the exact same as every time before. She went back to her quarters and sat on the edge of her bunk and looked at the report in her hands. She had made copies. The original was already filed with the unit's administrative office. She had done everything correctly. She opened the top copy and looked at the map of Black Ridge Valley, the canyon walls, the ridgeline positions, the spacing of the probable enemy emplacements, the 4-kilometer killing corridor with nowhere to turn around, nowhere to disperse, nowhere to go, except forward into fire or backward into more fire. She closed the folder. She got 4 hours of sleep. At 4:30 a.m., she was awake again, dressed and standing outside the operations center in the dark, watching the convoy vehicles get their final checks. 20 armored vehicles. Hundreds of Marines moving with the quiet professional efficiency of people who trusted their chain of command and trusted their mission briefing and were doing their jobs exactly as they had been trained to do them. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb found her standing there. Webb had been Olivia's de facto partner in the regimental scout section for almost 18 months. He was 33 from Memphis, Tennessee, with an easy laugh and the rare combination of outstanding physical ability and genuine intellectual humility. He had never once questioned why Olivia was in the unit. He had also never once let her pretend to be okay when she wasn't. "You haven't slept," he said, not as a question. "I slept 4 hours." "You look like you slept one." "I look exactly how I feel." She didn't look away from the vehicles. "Webb, I need you to look at something." She had the report under her arm. She handed it to him. Webb opened it in the dim light from the operations center doorway. He was quiet for a long time. He turned pages slowly. He looked at the maps the way she had taught him to look at terrain, which was with everything. Eyes, instinct accumulated, knowledge engaged simultaneously. After about 6 minutes, he closed the folder and handed it back to her. "You showed Whitmore this," he asked. "Yesterday morning." "What did he say?" "He said I was seeing shadows." Webb was quiet for another moment. Then he said very quietly, "Live." She knew what the word meant. It meant he saw it too. It meant he believed her. It also meant he understood exactly what that meant in terms of what was about to happen. "How long until they move?" she asked. 45 minutes. She nodded. "I'm going to request one more conversation with Garrison," she said. "I want it on record that I made the attempt. Garrison won't go around Whitmore on this." "I know. I want it on record anyway." She went back inside. She requested through the night duty officer an urgent brief with Lieutenant Colonel Garrison. The duty officer told her that the lieutenant colonel was in pre-mission preparation. She left her name and said it concerned the Black Ridge Valley operation and that she had time-sensitive intelligence concerns. Nobody called her back. At 5:15 a.m., Captain Whitmore passed her in the corridor outside the communications room. He saw her standing there in full kit, her report folder visible under her arm. He stopped. He looked at her. "Sergeant Carter," he said, "you are assigned to base security for the duration of this operation. Your post is the eastern perimeter. I need you there in 20 minutes. "Sir, I was hoping to speak with the lieutenant colonel before." "Eastern perimeter, Sergeant. 20 minutes. His voice had gone flat and final, like a door not just closed but locked. "The convoy is not your concern." He walked away. She stood in the corridor and breathed carefully through her nose. The eastern perimeter, away from the communications room, away from the command post, away from any position from which she could monitor the operation or do anything at all if her analysis proved correct. She went to get her gear. She was halfway there when she heard Webb's boots behind her. "I heard," he said. "Leave it. Live." "I said leave it, Marcus." She kept walking. He kept pace with her for another 20 steps, then stopped. She didn't stop. She went to the equipment room and stood in front of her locker for a long time without opening it. She looked at the lock. She looked at her hands. She thought about Earl Carter sitting on the hood of his truck in the hills east of Salinas, pointing at the terrain and saying, "Tell me what you see." She could see Black Ridge Valley in her mind with the precision of a technical drawing. She could see the ridge lines and the prepared positions in the 4-kilometer killing corridor, and the 20 armored vehicles full of Marines who were 40 minutes away from driving into the worst thing any of them had ever driven into. She could see all of it, and she was being sent to watch a perimeter fence in the opposite direction. She thought about what Whitmore had said, that she spent too much time staring through a scope, that she was seeing shadows and turning them into armies. She thought about what her grandfather had said. You see things, Livy? Don't let anyone tell you that you don't. She opened her locker. She took out her rifle. She took out her kit, her full field kit. Everything she would need for an extended solo position. The kit she had packed and repacked so many times in training that the weight of it felt like a second body, an extension of herself, rather than something she was carrying. She packed methodically. Extra ammunition, water, a radio set to the tactical frequency of the convoy, a small medical kit, the map, the report, one copy folded and secured in a zippered pocket. She was sitting on the bench lacing her boots when the door opened behind her. She expected Webb. It was First Sergeant Thomas Aguila. Aguila was 51 years old and had been in the Marine Corps for 32 of those years. He was not a large man, but he had the quality of density that some people develop over decades of serious physical work, a kind of compactness that made him look unmovable. He had kind eyes and a face that had learned not to show everything they saw. He came in and sat down on the bench across from her. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "You're not going to the eastern perimeter." It was not a question. "First Sergeant," she said carefully, "my assignment is the eastern perimeter. I'm packing up my kit to go to my assigned position." Aguila looked at the kit that anyone who had spent 32 years in the Marines would recognize immediately as a field kit for a solo extended position, not a base perimeter assignment. He didn't say anything about that. Instead, he said, "I read your report." She looked up at him. "I pulled the copy from admin this morning," he said, "before the convoy brief. I read the whole thing." He paused. "You're right." The two words landed in the equipment room like something dropped from a height. "First Sergeant." "You're right," he said, again quieter. "I know that terrain. I ran a patrol through that valley 11 years ago. We were lucky. The conditions were different, and we were lucky, and I have thought about that patrol approximately 500 times since then." He looked at his hands. "You mapped it exactly." Olivia was very still. "I don't know what to tell you," Aguila said. "I'm not in your chain of command. I don't have the authority to modify this mission." "If I did," he stopped, started again. "Whitmore isn't a bad officer. He's an officer who is very certain about things. That's its own kind of dangerous." She waited. "I'm going to go check on something in the communications room," Aguila said. He stood up. He moved toward the door. "I'm going to be there for the next 20 minutes. That's the only place I'm going to wait for the next 20 minutes. He said it carefully with a particular kind of emphasis that wasn't emphasis on words, but emphasis on fact. He was telling her something. He was telling her that for the next 20 minutes, nobody whose opinion mattered was going to be watching the equipment room door. "First Sergeant," she said. He turned. "If this goes the way I think it's going to go," she said, "the court-martial's going to fall on both of us." Aguila looked at her for a long moment. "Sergeant Carter," he said, "I've been in the Marine Corps for 32 years. I have seen a lot of things. I have done some things I'm proud of, and some things I carry around like rocks in my pack." He touched the door frame. "What I will not do at this point in my life is be the reason 480 Marines die because I knew something and didn't give someone with the courage to act on it 20 extra minutes." He walked out. The door closed. Olivia sat in the equipment room for exactly 15 seconds. Then she picked up her rifle, and she walked out the back. At 5:45 a.m., the convoy rolled into Black Ridge Valley. Olivia was already moving through the desert alone, heading toward the mountains. The rising sun hit the canyon walls and turned them orange and gold, and she didn't look at them. She was watching the ridgelines. She was watching the shapes at the edges of things, the way the morning shadows moved and where they didn't move. She was watching everything. Her radio was on but silent. The convoy frequency hummed with the routine traffic of a mission that thought it was routine. "All units, checkpoint Alpha, moving smooth." "Copy that. Eyes on the eastern ridge, nothing active." "Valley approach in 6 minutes." She was moving fast. Not running. Running in desert terrain with a full kit was how you arrived exhausted and made mistakes. Moving fast with purpose, with the efficiency of someone who had learned from a man who learned it the hardest possible way, that getting somewhere mattered less than getting there ready. The terrain was brutal in the way that southern Arizona terrain is brutal, which is to say it was beautiful and it was trying to kill her, and both of those things were equally true simultaneously. Rock cut through her gloves where she had to use her hands on a steep section. The heat, even this early, was already pressing down from above and radiating up from the ground, and there was no shade and no mercy anywhere. She kept moving. She was thinking about the eastern ridgeline, the probable positions she had identified from the drone footage, the spacing and the angles and the fields of fire from each position. She was thinking about what she would do if she were setting this ambush. She was thinking about what she would use as the trigger point where the convoy would be in the valley when the signal came to open fire. She was thinking about how long it would take her to reach the elevation she needed. She was thinking about whether she was going to make it in time. Then the radio in her kit, she had turned it up just slightly so she could hear it while moving, erupted. Contact, 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 taking fire from both ridges. She ran. She ran. Not the controlled pace movement she had been maintaining for the last 40 minutes. She ran the way people run when the sound coming through a radio is the sound of a world ending. Flat-out lungs-burning boots, hitting loose rock and sliding and catching and hitting again. The full kit slamming against her back with every stride, like something trying to drag her down. The radio kept screaming, RP, JRP. Vehicle 3 is hit. Vehicle 3 is down. We have wounded. We have a wounded. Where is air support? I can't see where it's coming from. It's coming from everywhere. She didn't stop running. She couldn't afford to stop. Every second that the convoy sat in that valley without someone neutralizing those ridgeline positions was another second in which the math of the situation moved further and further against survival. She knew what those positions could do. She had calculated it. She had put it in a report and handed it to men in a clean room, and they had laughed at her. And now 480 Marines were discovering, in the most brutal possible way, that she had not been wrong. The East Ridge was the priority. She had identified it in her analysis as the more dangerous of the two because of the angle. The eastern positions had a direct line of fire to the center of the valley corridor, where the convoy would be most compressed, most unable to maneuver, most exposed. If she could get above the eastern ridge positions above, and slightly to the north where the terrain created a natural counter-elevation, she would have angles on 4 of the probable 6 positions simultaneously. She had calculated the climb at approximately 35 minutes under normal movement conditions. She had maybe 15 left before the convoy began taking casualties at a rate that no amount of return fire would be able to offset. She pushed harder. The radio continued to paint a picture she couldn't see, but could construct perfectly in her mind from the pieces coming through. Vehicle 3 was burning. Vehicles 1 and 2 had pulled forward past the burn point and were taking direct fire from the western ridge. Vehicles 8 through 12 had stopped cold in the kill zone center and were attempting to use their armored bodies as shelter, while the Marines inside tried to identify targets they couldn't locate because the positions were dug and covered camouflaged exactly as her analysis had shown they would be. A voice she didn't recognize said with terrible calm, "We have 40+ wounded. We need air support. Where is air support?" Another voice, higher, less controlled. "Air is 22 minutes out. Repeat, air support is 22 minutes out. 22 minutes. She did the calculation without meaning to, without wanting to. 22 minutes against what those ridgeline positions were capable of delivering into a trapped target was not a survivable equation for everyone in that valley. Some of them, yes. Some would make it to the air support window, but the losses before that window closed would be catastrophic. She reached the base of the main climb and went up without stopping. Her hands found rock and found purchase, and her legs drove, and she did not think about the heat, or the pain, or the fact that she was one person with one rifle operating in direct violation of orders she had been given by people who had significantly more institutional authority than she did. She thought about the eastern ridge. She thought about the angles. She thought about breath control and trigger pull, in the specific, particular, almost meditative quality of silence that happened in the moment between decision and action when everything else in the world went quiet. Her grandfather had called it the stillness. Earl Carter had told her once, sitting on the hood of his truck with the California hills spread out below them, that the most important thing he had learned in Vietnam wasn't how to fight. It was how to find the stillness when everything around you was noise. The noise will try to be in charge, he had said. Every instinct you have will want to react to the noise. But the noise is a distraction. The stillness is where the real work happens. She climbed. At 11 minutes and 40 seconds, she cleared the top of the approach ridge and dropped flat on the rock surface, controlling her breathing with iron discipline, bringing herself down from the exertion before she moved to her position. Her hands were bleeding where the rock had cut through her gloves. She registered the fact the way she registered the heat, real present, not relevant. She moved to the edge. She set up her rifle. She looked through the scope. What she saw in the valley below made her chest tighten in a way that she would not let translate into anything except focus. The convoy was in chaos, vehicles burning, Marines using armored hulls and vehicle frames for cover. The dead and wounded were in clusters near the vehicles. A lieutenant she didn't recognize was standing in the open, fully exposed, directing wounded to covered positions with the specific kind of terrible courage that soldiers develop when they've run out of rational options and have nothing left but the decision about who they're going to be in the final moments. She forced herself to stop cataloging the damage and start finding targets. The first position was exactly where she had marked it in her report. 240 meters northwest of her position at the compass bearing she had calculated from the drone imagery. She found the barrel of the weapon in the scope, found the two men operating it, found the angle. She breathed. She found the stillness. She pulled the trigger. The machine gun stopped. She was already moving the scope before the echo of the shot finished rolling through the canyon. The second position was further north, slightly lower elevation. She found it in 4 seconds. The weapon crew there had heard the shot and were moving, repositioning, trying to understand where fire had come from above them, which meant they were confused because there were no friendly units on this ridge. There were no friendly units anywhere near this ridge, which meant the shot had come from somewhere that shouldn't have existed. She gave them 3 seconds to be confused. Then she found them. The second position went silent. Down in the valley, something was changing. The incoming fire from the eastern ridge had dropped noticeably. She could see it in the behavior of the Marines below. Heads coming up slightly, the instinct of soldiers who feel the weight of suppressive fire shift and respond to it physically before their brains have processed the information. She moved to the third position. The third position had already identified her approximate location. She found the muzzle flash a second before the round started hitting the rock around her position, close enough that she felt the impact vibrations through her elbows. She rolled left by 2 meters, set up again, found them fired twice. The third position went silent. She exhaled. She was 3 for 3. 3 positions. 3 shots per no. She had fired twice at the third position. 7 rounds total. The eastern ridge had 6 probable positions according to her analysis. She had neutralized 3. She moved. The rock face was starting to get dangerous. She was a known quantity now to whoever was running the enemy operation from the western side. They hadn't been able to predict her initial position, but they had her general location from the muzzle flash, and they were already trying to adjust and already trying to get rounds onto her ridge. She could hear the incoming fire crackling and snapping off rock surfaces 30 meters to her south. She moved north along the ridge, face keeping low, moving in the compressed, efficient crouch of someone who had practiced exactly this kind of movement for years. She found the fourth position from a new angle. She worked, and that was when the radio at her hip, the radio she had set to the convoy tactical frequency and almost forgotten in the focus of everything else, crackled with a voice she recognized. All elements. All elements. We have an unidentified shooter on the eastern ridgeline engaging enemy positions. Say again, we have a friendly, unidentified engaging from the eastern high ground. A pause, then who is that? Who is on that ridge? Identify yourself. She finished what she was doing. She finished it because the shot was already half committed and breaking it would cost more than completing it. The fourth position went silent. Then she keyed her radio. She said, Overwatch team, this is Ghost 6. Dead silence on the frequency. 4 full seconds of absolute silence. Then a voice, tightly controlled, professional, trying very hard to stay that way. Ghost 6, say again your call sign. Ghost 6, Eastern Ridge. I have 4 positions neutralized, 2 remaining. I need you to keep your elements from adjusting fire to the Eastern Ridge line for approximately 6 minutes. Another pause, shorter this time. Ghost 6, identify yourself. Who are you? She was already moving to the fifth position. She had the scope up. She had the angle. I'll identify after, she said. 6 minutes. Keep them off this ridge. She closed the transmission and focused on the fifth position. The fifth position was the most dangerous one she had marked. Not because of its firepower, it was a two-person rocket team, not a machine gun crew, but because of its location, which sat in a natural rock alcove that provided coverage from almost every approach angle, except the specific one she was currently occupying, which she had calculated from her analysis and which the people in that alcove had clearly not anticipated. They hadn't anticipated it because nobody was supposed to be on this ridge. She was in the one spot nobody had planned for. She used it. The fifth position went quiet. She was breathing hard now, not from exertion, but from the particular metabolic cost of sustained precision, work the counterintuitive reality that shooting accurately under pressure burns energy in a way that surprises people who haven't done it. The stillness wasn't passive. The stillness was work. She moved toward the sixth position, and that was when everything changed. She heard the voice on the radio again, closer this time, clearer, and she recognized it now, the slightly nasal quality of it, the particular cadence. Captain Whitmore. All units, identify the unauthorized shooter on the eastern ridgeline. I repeat, identify the unauthorized shooter immediately. Then a second voice. This is Bravo 6 Actual, Ghost 6. We don't have you listed on any friendly element map. You need to identify now. She keyed her radio and said, Bravo 6, you need to trust me for about 90 more seconds. Then she found the sixth position. The sixth position was the one she had been most uncertain about in her analysis. The satellite imagery had been ambiguous. The pattern suggested a position, but the confidence interval was lower than the others. She had marked it anyway because her read of the terrain said it was the logical location regardless of what the imagery showed, and her read of terrain had been Earl Carter's most important lesson. And Earl Carter had been right about everything that mattered. The sixth position existed exactly where she had marked it. She neutralized it, and then she lay flat on the hot rock of the eastern ridge above Black Ridge Valley, with 7 empty casings scattered around her position, and blood drying in her cut gloves, and her heart doing things that she was fairly sure it wasn't supposed to do, and she let herself take 2 full breaths before she keyed the radio again. Overwatch team to convoy actual, she said. Eastern Ridge is clear. Say again, Eastern Ridge is clear. 6 positions neutralized. The response took a moment. When it came in the voice of someone who was doing several kinds of emotional processing simultaneously. Ghost 6, identify yourself immediately. This is Sergeant Olivia Carter, Scout Section 7th Marine Regiment. She paused. Sir, you need to get those vehicles moving toward the northern exit point while the eastern fire is suppressed. You have maybe 4 minutes before they realize what happened up here and adjust. A silence that felt different from the previous silences. Heavier, more complicated. Then, did you say Sergeant Carter? Yes, sir. Olivia Carter. Yes, sir. You're supposed to be on the eastern perimeter at base. The absurdity of the statement was enormous. She felt something that, in another situation, might have become laughter. In this situation, it remained in her chest as a kind of pressure. Sir, she said carefully, I understand that, and I'm ready to answer for my actions fully when this is over. But right now, I need you to move those vehicles. Another pause. Captain Whitmore, said a different voice, deeper, steadier, with the unmistakable authority of someone who had just recalibrated under pressure. Give the movement order. She recognized the second voice, Lieutenant Colonel Garrison. A beat. Then Whitmore's voice, stiff and controlled. All elements, move to northern exit point. Repeat, move north, move now. She heard it in the radio and she saw it in the valley simultaneously. The vehicles began moving. The formation was damaged, several vehicles were gone, and the ones remaining were moving with the uneven gait of machinery that had taken hits, but they were moving. The Marines who had been using the vehicle hulls for cover were moving. The wounded were being moved. The whole mass of the convoy was flowing north toward the exit of the killing corridor, and the eastern ridge was silent. And the western ridge fire that had been the secondary threat was now suddenly the primary one, and would find itself in a few minutes dealing with incoming air support and a target that was no longer stationary. She watched it happen, She watched from the ridge above Black Ridge Valley as 480 Marines, some of them, not all of them, she had no illusions about the losses below, moved out of the kill zone that should have ended all of them. She sat with her back against the rock. She looked at her hands. The cuts from the climb had stopped bleeding. Her radio crackled one more time. Different voice. Someone she didn't recognize, young, slightly shaky. The voice of someone who had been in the fire and was now for the first time in 20 minutes not actively being shot at. Hey, Ghost 6, whoever you are. Thank you. She closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about Earl Carter. She thought about what he would say about this. She thought about the map and the report in the operation room, and Whitmore's laughter, and Garrison's squint, and Aguila in the equipment room doorway, saying 20 minutes. She thought about everything she had done in the last hour and 20 minutes. She thought about everything she was going to have to answer for. Then she opened her eyes and started breaking down her rifle, and she began to climb back down. She was halfway down the eastern face of the ridge when she heard the aircraft. The air support that was 22 minutes out had arrived at something slightly under that she guessed 18, maybe 19 minutes. She watched the aircraft make 2 passes over the western ridge. She heard the ordnance delivering. She kept climbing down. It took her 40 minutes to get back to relatively flat terrain and another 25 to reach the base perimeter. By then, the convoy, what remained of it, was already at the staging point 3 kilometers north of the valley exit. She could see the medical vehicles in the activity from a distance before she was within communication range. She walked in through the eastern perimeter gate. The guard there looked at her. He was a corporal she didn't know. He stared at her for a moment, the rifle, the kit, the cut gloves, the fact that she was walking in from the direction of the mountains rather than from the base interior. "Sergeant Carter," he said. "Corporal, were you just—" "I was where I was," she said. "Log me back in." She walked past him. She went directly to the operations center because that was where she had been told to go when she got back, the instruction having come through her radio approximately 12 minutes earlier in the terse, stripped-down language of military communications under pressure. "Report to operations center immediately." "Yes, sir." The operations center was crowded. More people than she expected. Word traveled fast in this environment, and the story of what had happened in Black Ridge Valley had obviously already outrun the formal after-action timeline. She could feel the eyes on her when she entered, could feel the specific quality of attention in a room where something extraordinary has recently happened, and the cause of that extraordinary thing has just walked through the door. She kept her face neutral. She had practiced that too. Garrison was there. Whitmore was there. First Sergeant Aguila was standing against the far wall with his arms crossed in an expression that told her absolutely nothing except that he was paying close attention. Webb was in the doorway to the adjacent room, and when he saw her face, he exhaled a long, slow exhale that she felt across the room. Garrison looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Get her a chair." Nobody moved for a second. Then Solis brought a chair. "Sit down, Sergeant." She sat. "You're bleeding," Garrison said. "Hand, sir." "Rock cuts on the climb. It's not significant." "Get her the medic," Garrison said to no one in particular, and someone left the room to do it. Then Garrison sat down across from her, and the room went as quiet as a room full of people can go when something very serious is happening. "Walk me through it," he said, "from the moment you left your assigned position." She walked him through it. She told it straight, without drama, without apology, and without the particular kind of self-protective hedging that people use when they're trying to manage how they're perceived. She told him she had assessed the risk, she had reported it through channels she had been denied, she had made the decision that the risk to the convoy outweighed the consequences of violating her orders, and she had acted on that decision. She told him all 6 positions. She told him the approach, the angles, the sequence, the radio communications. She told him everything. When she finished, the room was still quiet. Whitmore was looking at a point on the wall somewhere to her left. His jaw was tight. Whatever he was feeling, he had it managed, but the managing was visible. Garrison said, "Your analysis in the report. The report you brought to Captain Whitmore 48 hours ago." "Yes, sir." "It was accurate." "Yes, sir. All 6 positions were within 50 meters of where I had marked them. The spacing, the camouflage method, the probable weapon types, it was consistent with the analysis." Garrison was quiet. Then he said very carefully, "Sergeant Carter, do you understand that you violated a direct order?" "Yes, sir." Do you understand the potential consequences? Yes, sir. Do you have anything you want to say about your decision to do so? She thought about it. She had thought about it in a way since 5:15 a.m. when Whitmore told her to go to the eastern perimeter. She had had the whole brutal climb and the work on the ridge and the climb down and the walk back to think about what she would say in this room. She said, "Sir, I knew what was in that valley. I had reported it and it wasn't acted on. The convoy moved into the situation I predicted and the outcome began to match the prediction. I had the capability to reduce casualties. I made the decision to use it." She paused. "I would make the same decision again." Dead silence. Then Aguila from the wall said quietly, "Outstanding." One word, but he said it the way a person says something they've been holding in for a while. Whitmore turned to look at him. Aguila looked back at Whitmore with an expression of complete professional neutrality that somehow still managed to communicate everything. Garrison looked at Olivia for a long moment. "The medical team will see to your hands," he said finally. "You're restricted to base pending investigation. Turn in your weapon to the armory." "Yes, sir." "Sergeant Carter." She stood. "The preliminary casualty count from the valley," Garrison said. "We'll have final numbers after the medical teams complete their assessments." He paused. 12 dead, 61 wounded. Given the size and duration of the ambush, given the positions arrayed against us, given the fact that the convoy was stationary in the kill zone for nearly 20 minutes before you eliminated those eastern positions. He stopped. He looked at her. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. She knew what the number would have looked like without the eastern ridge work. She had done that math in her analysis. She had put it in the report. She had highlighted it in yellow. "Yes, sir," she said. She surrendered her rifle to the armory. She let the medic clean the cuts on her hands. He was young and quiet, and he worked with a careful efficiency that reminded her oddly of the way she worked, and she didn't say anything while he bandaged her, and he didn't say anything either until he was done. And then he said, "Sergeant Carter." "Yeah, my cousin is in Bravo Company, second vehicle from the front." She waited. "He called me from the staging point. He's okay." He tied off the last bandage. He said someone took out the eastern ridge positions. He said if they hadn't the vehicles behind him. He stopped. Started again. "He's okay." He looked at her hands, both of them bandaged now and then up at her face. "Thank you," he said. She didn't know what to say to that. She had heard it once already from the anonymous young voice on the radio as the vehicles cleared the valley. She thought she probably needed to get better at knowing what to say to it because she had the strong sense that she was going to hear it several more times before this was over. She said, "Do your job and go home. That's all any of us are trying to do." He nodded. She walked out into the hard Arizona sun and stood for a moment with her bandaged hands at her sides. Her rifle gone, her kit still on her back, the specific hollow quality of aftermath settling into her bones. 12 dead. She held that number. She would not put it aside, and she would not let herself be talked out of holding it, because the people it represented were real people with families and cousins who called them from staging points to say they were okay, and those 12 did not have that. And the weight of that belonged to her as much as it belonged to anyone who had failed to act when action was available. She would carry that weight. What she would not do was pretend she should have done otherwise. Webb found her 10 minutes later, standing by the perimeter fence looking out at nothing. He stood next to her. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, 61 wounded and 12 dead. Yeah, against 480. Yeah, he was quiet again. Then you know what the investigative board is going to do? Yeah. You could lose your rank, your position. Worst case court-martial. Yeah, Marcus. And you do it again. She didn't answer because she had already answered it in the room, and saying it twice felt unnecessary. Webb nodded slowly. Okay, he said. Just that, okay. He stood next to her by the fence in the Arizona heat for another 10 minutes without saying anything else, and that was exactly what she needed, and they both knew it. Inside the operations center, behind the walls she couldn't see through, and in conversations she wasn't part of. Things were being decided about her future in a course she had served with everything she had. She stood by the fence and waited. She had done what she could do. Now it was someone else's turn. The investigation began at 1400 hours. Not quietly, not behind closed doors the way these things were supposed to happen. It began with a summons delivered by a junior officer who couldn't quite make eye contact with her when he handed her the paper, and it moved from there into the kind of institutional machinery that the military runs with the same relentless precision it applies to everything else, which is to say, without sentiment and without pause. Olivia had known it was coming. She had known it from the moment she walked back through the perimeter gate. She had known it before that, honestly. She had known it from the moment she picked up her rifle in the equipment room and walked out the back. You do not ignore a direct order in the United States Marine Corps and then act surprised when the Corps wants to talk about it. She was not surprised. What she had not fully anticipated was the speed. The formal notice of investigation arrived 3 hours and 22 minutes after she surrendered her weapon at the armory. The investigative board convened the following morning. She was given access to a JAG officer, Lieutenant Sandra Patel, 28 years old, sharp eyes and a precise manner of speaking that reminded Olivia of someone who had learned early in life that precision was a form of self-defense. Patel met with her the night before the board convened. They sat across from each other in a small room that smelled like industrial cleaner, and Patel put a yellow legal pad on the table between them and held a pen and looked at Olivia with the specific expression of a person who is about to do something difficult. "I've read the incident report," Patel said. "I've also read the threat assessment report you submitted to Captain Whitmore 48 hours before the convoy departure." "Okay," Olivia said. "You wrote that report without being assigned to do so." "That's correct. You submitted it through proper channels." "Yes." "It was reviewed and dismissed." "Yes." Patel wrote something on the pad. "The board is going to want to establish a clear timeline of your decision-making process. From the point you received Captain Whitmore's order to report to the eastern perimeter to the point you left the base." "I left the base approximately 32 minutes after receiving that order." "What were you doing in those 32 minutes?" "Packing my kit, to First Sergeant Aguila." Patel's pen paused on the pad. "First Sergeant Aguila spoke with you in the equipment room." "Yes." "Did he advise you to leave the base?" Olivia looked at the legal pad. She thought about Aguila in the doorway. "I'm going to be in the communications room for the next 20 minutes. She thought about the way he had said it, the care in it. "First Sergeant Aguila told me he had read my report and that he believed my analysis was correct," she said. "He then informed me of his intention to go to the communications room." Patel looked at her steadily. "That's all. That's what he said to me." A pause. "Sergeant Carter, I need to ask you something directly. And I need you to answer me directly because how you answer this tomorrow in front of that board is going to have significant consequences for you and potentially for others. Ask it. Did First Sergeant Aguila implicitly or explicitly encourage you to leave your assigned position and engage the enemy?" Olivia held the question for a moment. She thought about 12 dead. She thought about 61 wounded. She thought about what the number would have looked like without the Eastern Ridge work. She thought about a medic's cousin in the second vehicle who called from the staging point to say he was okay. She thought about Thomas Aguila, 32 years of service, 2 more years to a full retirement. A man who had looked at her report and looked at her and made a choice. "First Sergeant Aguila told me he believed my analysis was correct," she said. "Everything else I did was my decision alone." Patel held her gaze for a long moment. Then she wrote something on the pad. "Okay," she said. The board convened at 0800 the next morning. There were 5 members. Colonel Michael Reynolds presided. Reynolds was 61 years old, a combat veteran of 2 wars with a service record that occupied more pages than most people's life histories. He had the face of someone who had spent decades watching young people face the worst circumstances imaginable and had developed a specific practice neutrality about it that was not coldness. It was the professional equivalent of a surgeon's focus. The understanding that sentiment, in certain rooms, got in the way of clarity. Whitmore was there. He sat to the right side of the room with the composure of a man who was under significant pressure and had decided that the best response to that pressure was absolute stillness. Olivia noticed he did not look at her when she entered. Garrison was there. He sat across the room from Whitmore, and he watched her enter with the expression of a man who had not slept well. Aguila was seated in the waiting area outside. She had seen him when she passed. He had looked up at her and given her a small nod, the specific minimal nod of a person communicating, "I am here and I am not moving." Reynolds opened the proceedings with the formal language of a military board charges timeline, Relevant regulations. Olivia sat with her hands flat on the table in front of her and listened to the architecture of her situation being assembled piece by piece in the dry language of military procedure. Violation of direct order. Article 90 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Dereliction of duty. Unauthorized use of a weapon in a combat-adjacent situation. She had known all of it. Hearing it read aloud was different from knowing it. Patel beside her was writing notes with focused speed. She had told Olivia that morning and let me do the procedural work. You just tell the truth. Reynolds looked up from the document he had been reading from. Sergeant Carter, sir, you understand the charges as stated? Yes, sir. Before we proceed to testimony, I want to establish one foundational fact for the record. He set the document down. Your threat assessment report submitted to Captain Whitmore on March 7th, 48 hours before the convoy entered Black Ridge Valley. The board has reviewed that report in its entirety. Can you describe for the record what that report contained? She described it. She went through it the same way she had described it to Garrison the afternoon before, methodically without drama, covering the satellite analysis, the historical engagement patterns, the terrain assessment, the probable enemy positions, the conclusion. When she finished, Reynolds said, the board has also reviewed the after-action intelligence summary prepared by the Regimental Intelligence Section following the engagement yesterday. He looked at her. Your report and the after-action intelligence summary describe the same positions, the same weapons configurations, and the same tactical intent, with a degree of consistency that the intelligence section has described as, and I'm quoting from their summary, remarkable. The room was very quiet. Olivia said nothing. Remarkable, Reynolds said again, not as emphasis, as something he was turning over in his mind. Then Whitmore spoke. Sir, Whitmore said, and his voice was controlled and clear. If I may. Reynolds looked at him. Go ahead, Captain. The accuracy of Sergeant Carter's analysis does not alter the fundamental issue before this board. Sergeant Carter received a direct order. She violated that order. The fact that her individual assessment proved correct does not establish a principle under which any Marine is entitled to violate orders based on personal judgment regardless of the outcome. He paused. If we accept that principle, we accept the dissolution of command authority. That is not a position this institution can take. It was a good argument. Olivia knew it was a good argument. It was the argument that the institution had to make, not because it was wrong, but because it was necessary. Because the alternative, an institution where every soldier substituted personal judgment for orders in the field, was genuinely dangerous. She did not disagree with it. She was also prepared for it. Reynolds looked at her. Sergeant Carter, you've heard the captain's argument. Do you have a response? Olivia looked at Whitmore for a moment, then at Reynolds. Sir, she said, Captain Whitmore is not wrong. Command authority is real, and it exists for real reasons, and I do not dispute that I violated it. She took a breath. What I would ask the board to consider is the sequence of events that preceded my violation. I identified a threat. I reported it through proper channels. I was denied. I attempted a second time to escalate the concern before convoy departure. That was also denied. She paused. At the point where the convoy entered the valley and began taking casualties, consistent with my exact predictions, I was in possession of both the knowledge and the capability to reduce those casualties. I made a judgment call. A judgment call that violated your orders, Reynolds said. Yes, sir. A judgment call that also saved the board can look at the casualty analysis and make its own determination of what the full engagement would have produced without intervention. I'm not going to overstate my contribution, but the Eastern Ridge positions would have continued to operate, and the convoy was stationary in the kill zone, and the math on that is not favorable. Silence. Then Reynolds said, what would you have needed in that 48-hour window between your report and the convoy departure to have your concerns addressed through proper channels? It was a different kind of question. She hadn't expected it. Someone with the authority to delay the mission pending additional reconnaissance, she said. One additional drone sweep of the eastern and western ridge lines. 8 hours, maybe 12, to get clean imagery and let an intelligence section review what I was seeing in the existing footage. She paused. Sir, I'm not asking for anyone to have taken my word. I'm asking for anyone to have looked at the evidence. The word anyone sat in the room for a moment. Everyone in the room understood who it pointed at. Whitmore's jaw tightened. He said nothing. Reynolds made a note. What happened next was the moment that Olivia would think about for years afterward, would replay in specific detail, at unexpected times in the middle of ordinary days, while doing ordinary things because it was the moment the board became something other than what she had expected it to be. Reynolds looked up from his notes and said, "I want to hear from Lieutenant Colonel Garrison." Garrison stood. He was a careful man. Olivia had understood that about him from the first time she'd been in a room with him. He was a man who assembled his thoughts before he spoke, and then spoke them with the exactness of someone who understood that words in certain rooms were permanent. He stood and he looked at Reynolds and he said, "Sir, I reviewed Sergeant Carter's report the morning of March 7th. I reviewed it after she had already presented it to Captain Whitmore and been dismissed." The room temperature seemed to change. Garrison continued, "I found the analysis credible. I had reservations about the mission route as a result of reviewing it. I did not act on those reservations through proper channels. I did not delay the mission. I did not request additional reconnaissance." He stopped. "That failure belongs to me, not to Sergeant Carter." Nobody moved. Whitmore was looking at Garrison with an expression that was very hard to read. Something complex moving behind his eyes, something that might have been anger and might have been something closer to the beginning of understanding. Reynolds said very quietly, "You're saying you saw the report?" "Yes, sir." "And believed it had merit?" "Yes, sir." "And you did not act?" A pause. "No, sir, I did not." Reynolds made another note. He wrote for a long time without looking up. The sound of his pen on the paper was the only sound in the room. When he finally looked up, he looked at Olivia. "Sergeant Carter," he said, "you are dismissed pending board deliberation. You'll be notified of the board's findings within 72 hours. She stood. "Sir," she said. She walked out. Aguila was still in the waiting area. He looked up when she emerged. He looked at her face and said, "How did it go?" Garrison told him he reviewed the report and didn't act. Aguila was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Thomas Garrison is a good man." "Yes, sir." "He's going to take some heat for that." "Yes, sir." Aguila stood up. He was not a demonstrative person. 32 years in the Marines had given him a particular economy of expression, a way of communicating important things in the smallest possible gestures. He put his hand on her shoulder for exactly 2 seconds and then took it away. "You did right," he said. 12 people are dead, First Sergeant. 12 people are dead and 468 are not," he said. "Both of those things are true and you carry both of them. That's the job." She nodded. She walked outside. Webb was waiting by the building. Of course he was. Webb was always where he needed to, which was one of the things that made him exceptional, and one of the things she had never told him, because there were things you didn't say. "Well," he said, "Garrison told the board he read the report and didn't act." Webb blinked. "He said that on the record." "On the record?" "In front of Whitmore. In front of everybody." Webb exhaled. He looked at the sky for a moment with the expression of someone recalibrating. "Okay," he said, "you keep saying that. It keeps being true." She almost smiled. Almost. "What happens now?" he asked. 72 hours, she said. "Then they tell me what I cost myself." He nodded. They still stood there for a moment in the Arizona heat. Then Webb said, "There's something you should know." His voice had changed. The easy quality was gone. Something more careful had replaced it. "What?" she said. "The Marines from the valley, from the convoy, the ones who made it back to the staging point yesterday, He paused. "Some of them started asking about you last night. Who was on the Eastern Ridge? Who Ghost 6 was? And someone told them." She processed that. "How many asked? A lot live." She shook her head slightly. She didn't know what to do with that. She didn't have a category for it yet. "I don't want," she started. "I know what you don't want," Webb said. "That's not really the point right now." She looked at him. "The point is that 468 people know your name today who didn't know it yesterday," he said. "And most of them are going to have feelings about that for a long time." She thought about the medic's cousin, second vehicle from the front. He called from the staging point. She thought about the voice on the radio. Just a young voice, slightly shaky, saying thank you. She stood in the Arizona heat and thought about all of it and didn't know what to say. Over the next 72 hours, 3 things happened. The first was that the board deliberated. She wasn't party to those deliberations, but Patel kept her informed of the procedural movements. And from those movements, she could construct a rough sense of where things were going. The deliberations were longer than she had expected, which Patel said could mean different things, and she shouldn't try to read too much into the duration. She tried not to. She failed. The second thing that happened was that 17 Marines from the convoy came to find her. Not together, they came in ones and twos at different hours over the course of the 3 days. They found her at the perimeter at the mess, sitting outside her quarters in the evening. Some of them were surgically bandaged. One was on crutches. They said different things in different ways, with different levels of composure, but the core of what they said was the same. She took it the only way she knew how to take it, which was by listening and then asking about them, where they were from, what their unit was doing before the deployment, whether their families knew they were okay. She deflected the praise by converting it into conversation. She was not entirely sure this was healthy, but it was what she had. One of them, a sergeant named Eli Tran, from Vehicle 4, sat with her for almost an hour. He was 26, originally from Orange County, and he had the specific quality of someone who had been through something in the last 48 hours that had rearranged his understanding of several things. "I was in the vehicle," he said, "when the Eastern fire stopped. It was, you could feel it. You could feel the difference in the air." "Where were you hit?" she asked, meaning the vehicle. "Front quarter panel. We were lucky." He looked at his hands. "My gunner was down, and then the Eastern ridge just stopped. And I didn't know why. And then I heard your voice on the radio." He stopped. "And what?" she said. "And I thought I had no idea what was happening. I didn't know who Ghost 6 was. I just knew that someone had done something up there that made it possible for us to move." He looked at her. "When I found out it was one person, one rifle." "The terrain did most of the work," she said. "That's not Sergeant Carter. That's not what happened." "The positions were placed where the terrain put them," she said. "I just knew the terrain." He looked at her for a long moment. "Someone taught you to do that," he said. It wasn't a question. She thought about Earl Carter on the hood of his truck. "Yeah," she said, "someone did." The third thing that happened at 16:30 hours on the third day was that Colonel Reynolds called her back in. She went alone. Patel had offered to accompany her, but Olivia had said no. Whatever Reynolds was going to tell her, she wanted to hear it, standing on her own. The room was smaller than the boardroom, just Reynolds, a table, 2 chairs, and a manila folder with her name on it. Garrison was not there. Whitmore was not there. Aguila was not there. Just Reynolds. He told her to sit. She sat. He opened the folder and looked at it for a moment. Then he closed it and looked at her. "Sergeant Carter," he said, "in 31 years of service, I have sat on 7 investigative boards. I have never been the presiding officer on one that required as much deliberation as this one." She said nothing. "The board has reached its findings," he said. She breathed slowly. "You violated a direct order. That finding stands. It is in your record, and it will remain in your record." He paused. "The board has also found, based on the totality of the circumstances, including the accuracy of your threat assessment, the sequence of your attempts to report through proper channels, and the outcome of your intervention, that a punitive discharge or reduction in rank would not serve the interests of the institution or of justice." She absorbed that. "You are receiving a formal reprimand," Reynolds said. "It will be documented. It will have implications for promotion consideration." He looked at her steadily. "Do you understand what that means?" "Yes, sir. It means I'll carry this." "You'll carry it," he said. "Yes." She nodded. Reynolds was quiet for a moment. He looked at the closed folder with her name on it. Then he looked back at her. "Off the record," he said. She waited. "I have read your service record in its entirety," he said. "I have read your training evaluations, your deployment assessments, your unit performance ratings. I have read every notation made about your independence and your unwillingness to defer to authority and your tendency to challenge the judgment of superiors." He paused. "I want to say something to you about all of that." She said nothing. "Those notations were written by people who were not wrong about what they observed," Reynolds said. "You are independent. You are unwilling to defer when you believe deference is wrong. You do challenge authority." He looked at her directly. "In a functioning system with functioning leadership, those qualities need to be managed carefully because they create friction." Another pause. "In a broken moment, in the specific kind of broken moment that happened 3 days ago in Black Ridge Valley, Those exact qualities are the difference between a tragedy and a catastrophe. She felt something shift in her chest. She held it still. I'm not telling you that you were right to violate your orders, Reynolds said. I'm telling you that you were right about what was in that valley and that the institution failed to use what you knew. He picked up the folder. That failure is not yours. The reprimand is yours. The failure belongs somewhere else. He stood. She stood. Dismiss Sergeant Carter. She walked to the door. Carter, he said. She turned. The request for sniper school qualification, he said. It was denied twice. Yes, sir. Put in the application again, he said. When this settles? She looked at him. That's not a promise, he said. I'm not in your chain of command. I'm just suggesting you put in the application. She held his gaze for a moment. Yes, sir, she said. She walked out. The Arizona evening had come while she was inside the way. Evenings came in the desert suddenly without much warning, the heat dropping and the sky going from white to pink to purple in what felt like a single breath. She stood outside the building with the formal reprimand in her record, in the eastern ridge behind her, and 12 dead and 468 alive, and the weight of all of it distributed across her, the way weight distributes itself when you've decided you're going to carry it, not just in one place, not dragging behind you, but settled into the bones part of the structure of yourself. Webb was waiting. He took one look at her face and said, reprimand. You're still in. Still in. He exhaled. Okay. You have to stop saying that. Not today, he said. Today, I'm going to keep saying it. She looked at him. He looked back at her. You okay? He asked. She thought about it. She thought about the real answer and the convenient answer and the gap between them. Ask me again in about a week, she said. Webb nodded. Deal. They walked back toward the barracks in the purple desert evening, and Olivia Carter carried what she carried, and she kept moving forward, which was the only direction she had ever known how to go. The reprimand was one page official, letterhead, Colonel Reynolds' signature at the bottom. Olivia had read it 3 times in the first hour after receiving it, not because the language was unclear, but because she was doing the thing she always did with important documents, reading it until the words stopped carrying emotional weight and became just information she could think about clearly. By the 3rd reading, she had it. She folded it and put it in the inside pocket of her jacket and walked to the mess hall for the first real meal she'd had in 3 days, and she ate it methodically alone at a corner table. And she did not think about what came next until she had finished. What came next was the hard part, not the board, not the reprimand, not even the 12 who were gone, though she would carry them for the rest of her life, and she knew it. The hard part was the days immediately after the ones that didn't have a clear structure to move through the ones where the adrenaline had cleared her system and left behind something quieter and more complicated. She called her mother that evening from a satellite phone set up near the comms building. Her mother answered on the second ring the way she always answered, fast, like she'd been waiting, like she was always slightly braced for the call that would tell her something she didn't want to hear. Livy, her mother said. Hey, Mom. A pause. Her mother was very good at reading silences. Are you hurt? Her mother asked. Hands, rock cuts, nothing serious. Are you in trouble? Olivia thought about the 1-page letter in her inside pocket. Some, she said, the kind I can live with. Another pause. Tell me, her mother said. So she told her. Not everything, not the full tactical detail, not the 6 positions and the precise sequence, but the shape of it. She told her about the report and the warning and Whitmore's dismissal and the convoy and what she'd done in the board. Her mother listened all the way through without interrupting. That was something Olivia had always appreciated about her. She listened like listening was a skill she had deliberately cultivated, which it probably was a woman who raised 4 children alone and worked double shifts and still read to them every night had to have learned somewhere that the most important part of being present for someone was keeping your own noise out of the way long enough to hear them. When Olivia finished, her mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Your grandfather would have done exactly the same thing. Olivia closed her eyes briefly. I know, she said. Are you going to be okay? Her mother asked. Yeah, Mom. Are you sure? I'm sure. Because I can ask again. I know, I'm sure. Her mother said, I'm proud of you. She said it simply without drama, the way she said things that were true. Thank you, Mom. Call me when you can. I will. She hung up and stood outside the comms building in the dark Arizona night for a while, holding the satellite phone and not thinking about anything in particular, which was its own kind of rest. What she didn't know yet, what nobody had told her because it was still in motion, still developing in ways that moved faster than official communication channels, was that the story had already left the base. It had left the base in the pockets and phones in conversations of 468 Marines who had been in Black Ridge Valley and survived it, and it was traveling at the speed that stories travel when they carry the particular weight of something that felt impossible. One Marine had posted about it on social media within hours of returning to the staging point. Then another. The posts were careful, operational security was real, and these were trained soldiers, but the shape of the story was clear enough even in careful language. A single shooter on the ridge, an unauthorized position, 6 enemy emplacements cleared in under 20 minutes. A female sergeant nobody had listened to. Olivia did not know about any of this at 1930 hours when she was standing outside the comms building. She found out the next morning. Webb told her over coffee in the mess hall at 0630 with the particular expression of someone delivering news that is simultaneously good and complicated, and he wasn't sure which one was going to land first. "You're on the internet," he said. She looked at him over her coffee cup. "Define on the internet." "I mean, people are talking about what you did. There are posts. There are articles." He slid his phone across the table. She looked at it. She read the first article, then the second. She put the phone back on the table and picked up her coffee. "Well," she said, "yeah. She stopped, started again. "I didn't want this. I know. This isn't what I was trying to live, I know, but it's there now." She drank her coffee and thought about it. The problem with the story being out was not the story itself. She didn't have shame about what she had done. The problem was that the story traveling at internet speed was going to get ahead of the institutional process, was going to create pressure and noise around decisions that were still being made by people who needed to make them without that noise. And pressure from outside was the kind of thing that could make the people inside do either the right thing for the wrong reasons or the wrong thing out of defensiveness. She could not control it. She went to Patel's office. Patel had already seen the articles. She was at her desk with 3 of them open on her screen when Olivia knocked and entered. "Sit down," Patel said. Olivia sat. "You didn't authorize any of this," Patel said. "No." "You didn't speak to any journalists?" "No." "Okay." Patel closed 2 of the tabs and kept one open. "Then officially, this is people who were present exercising their right to discuss their experience. You have no control over it. What you do have control over is how you conduct yourself in the next 72 hours. She looked at Olivia. "Media requests are going to come. They may already be coming through official channels. You do not speak to anyone without going through my office first." "Understood. I mean anyone. A friend of a friend who is a journalist, a veteran advocacy group, a documentary filmmaker, anyone." "Understood." Patel leaned back. "How are you doing with all of this?" It was a different kind of question from the ones Patel usually asked. More personal, less procedural. Olivia thought about it genuinely. "I'm okay with what I did," she said. "I'm less okay with what comes out of it that I didn't plan for." Patel nodded. "That's honest?" "You asked." "I did." She paused. "For what it's worth, Sergeant Carter, I've been doing JAG work for 4 years. I have never had a client who was more clearly right about something the institution got wrong." She said it carefully, like she was aware of the specific weight of each word. "The reprimand is what it is. But I want you to know that I believe you handled an impossible situation with more integrity than most people would have." Olivia absorbed that. "Thank you," she said. "Now go back to your duties and don't talk to anyone with a phone," Patel said, and the professional efficiency was back in her voice, which was its own kind of kindness. The duties were administrative for the time being. Base functions, unit support at work, nothing operational. She was not yet cleared to return to her normal role. That would come in time or it wouldn't, but for now she moved through her days with the discipline of someone who understood that how you handle the routine is how you reveal your actual character. 4 days after the board at 0900 hours, she was called to Garrison's office. She had not spoken to Garrison since the board. She had seen him at a distance at the mess walking between buildings, and he had acknowledged her with the nod of a man carrying something he was still deciding how to carry. She had returned the nod and kept moving. His office was small and organized in the way of a man who considered disorder a form of disrespect. He stood when she entered, which was not necessary and therefore meant something. "Sit down, Sergeant Carter." She sat. He sat. He looked at her for a moment with the particular expression she had come to associate with him, the careful look, the assembling thoughts look. "I want to say something to you," he said. "Sir, what I said at the board about reviewing your report and not acting." He paused. "I need you to know that I am going to spend a significant amount of time thinking about why I made that choice. Not to excuse it, to understand it." He looked at his desk. "I believe I convinced myself that you were probably right about the risk, but that the risk was within acceptable parameters, that the mission was sound enough to proceed." He stopped. "I was wrong. I knew the terrain. I had run a patrol through that valley 11 years ago, and I walked out of it with the same feeling you described in your report, and I still let the convoy go in." She listened without moving. "The 12 who didn't come back," he said. "I carry that differently now than I did before. I expect I'll carry it on for the rest of my career." "Sir," she said carefully, "you don't need to tell me this." "I know I don't." He looked up at her. "I'm telling you because you deserve to know that someone in authority heard you and knows they should have acted on it. Not for your legal situation, your situation is resolved. For you personally." A pause behind him. "Because the thing that happens to people who are right when the institution fails them, if they don't get some kind of acknowledgement, is that they start to doubt themselves. They start to sand down the edges of their own instincts to fit better. And that would be a waste." Olivia felt something in her chest that was not quite any single emotion, but rather several of them occupying the same space. "Thank you, sir," she said. "When your administrative restriction is lifted," Garrison said, "I want you back on regular duties." "Sir?" "And Carter," he looked at her directly, "put in the sniper school application." She almost reacted, caught it. "Reynolds," she said, not a question. "Reynolds," he confirmed. She nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." She left his office and stood in the corridor outside it for a moment. 2 separate senior officers had told her to apply to sniper school in the last 5 days. The same school that had rejected her twice for being too independent, too stubborn, too willing to challenge authority. She thought about that. She almost smiled. The next thing that happened she had not expected. 6 days after the board at 14:30 hours, an official vehicle arrived at the base carrying a visitor whose presence had not been announced through normal channels. Olivia found out about it through Webb, who found out through the particular osmosis of information that moves through a Marine base faster than any official communication system. "General Harlan Stokes," Webb said, and he said it the way you say the name of someone whose rank is so far above the current conversation that the name itself takes up extra space. "General Harlan Stokes, Deputy Commandant for Combat Development and Integration. A man whose name appeared in the same sentences as words like policy and doctrine and institutional direction. He's here about the Valley," she said. "He's here about a lot of things," Webb said. "The Valley is one of them." "How do you know all this?" "I talk to people," Webb said. She waited. "He requested a briefing on the engagement," Webb said. "Full after action. And he asked specifically to speak with the Marine who conducted the Overwatch operation." She absorbed that. "Me," she said. "You." She looked at him. "Okay," she said. "You keep stealing my line," he said. The meeting with General Stokes happened the following morning at 800 in the formal conference room that was used for high-level visitors and smelled like wood polish in institutional gravity. Stokes was 63 years old with the bearing of someone who had been comfortable with authority for so long that he wore it the way other people wore their skin, not as something put on, but as something simply present. He was not unkind looking. He had intelligent eyes that moved quickly and a way of going still when he was listening that told you the listening was real. He stood when she entered. She stopped. Generals didn't stand for sergeants. That was simply not the order of things. He extended his hand. "Sergeant Carter," he said, "thank you for coming." She shook his hand. "Sir." They sat. Reynolds was there. Garrison was there. 2 officers she didn't recognize were in the room's periphery taking notes. Stokes looked at her for a moment. "I've read everything," he said. "The threat assessment report, the board findings, the after-action intelligence summary. He paused. I've also read your complete service record. Sir, I want to ask you some questions, he said, not for the record, informally. Is that acceptable to you? Yes, sir. When you wrote that threat assessment report, he said, what did you expect to happen when you submitted it? She thought about the honest answer. I expected it to be reviewed seriously, she said. I expected someone to request additional reconnaissance based on what I was showing them. I did not expect it to be dismissed without any follow-up verification. Were you surprised that it was dismissed? She held the question. No, sir, she said. Disappointed, not surprised. Something shifted slightly in his expression. Why not surprised, he said. Because it had happened before, she said. Not at this scale, but the pattern of identifying something through analysis and having it not taken seriously, that wasn't new. Tell me about the pattern, he said. So she told him. She told him about the 2 sniper school rejections. She told him about the training exercises where she had identified security gaps that were initially dismissed and later proven real. She told him what the official notations said about her: too independent, too stubborn, too willing to challenge authority. And she told him how she had decided to respond to those notations. She told him because he had asked and because he was listening the way Garrison listened, with the quality of attention that meant the listening was real and the answer actually mattered. When she finished, Stokes was quiet for a moment. Sergeant Carter, he said, I want to tell you something that I need you to understand is not flattery and is not institutional response management. She waited. The system failed you, he said, not because individuals were malicious, because systems have structural failure modes, and one of the most dangerous ones in any military organization is the suppression of accurate information from unconventional sources. He paused. You are an unconventional source in several ways. You are a woman in a role that has historically been resistant to women. You are a junior enlisted analyst operating in a space that is institutionally reserved for designated intelligence personnel. And you are someone who has a track record of being right when the consensus opinion is wrong, which is the kind of track record that makes institutions uncomfortable. She said nothing. When someone like you is right, he said, the institution has 2 choices. It can learn from it and restructure to use what you bring better. Or it can treat it as an exception and return to the comfortable assumption that the system works. He looked at her steadily. I am here today, Sergeant Carter, because I intend to see that we take the first option. The room was very quiet. Reynolds had stopped making notes. What I'm about to tell you is preliminary, Stokes said. Nothing is finalized, but I want you to hear it from me directly. He paused. The engagement at Black Ridge Valley, and specifically the failure of the command structure to act on available intelligence, is going to be reviewed at a level above this regiment. That review is going to look at how threat intelligence from non-designated sources is handled, how analysis from personnel outside the formal intelligence pipeline is evaluated, and what command accountability looks like when intelligence is ignored and the predicted outcome occurs. She processed that. Additionally, Stokes said, I've spoken with the sniper school commandant. Her heart moved. She kept her face exactly where it was. The school's rejection criteria as applied to your applications will be reviewed, he said. The documented rationale in both rejections, the independence, the tendency to challenge authority will be specifically examined in the context of what those qualities produced in actual field conditions. He let that sit for a moment. I'm not promising you a qualification, he said. I'm telling you the door is going to be looked at again. She breathed carefully. Yes, sir, she said. Thank you, sir. Stokes looked at her for a long moment. Do you have any questions for me? He said. She thought about it. The 12, she said. He waited. What happens to account for them, she said. Not legally, not procedurally, but actually what happens so that the next time someone hands a senior officer a correct threat assessment, it gets looked at seriously. The room was very, very quiet. Stokes held her gaze. That's what the review is for, he said. Will it work? She said. He didn't answer immediately. That was its own kind of answer, and she respected him for it. I don't know, he said finally. Institutions are difficult to change. I've been trying to change this one for 30 years, and I will tell you that some days it feels like rearranging furniture, and some days it feels like something actually moved. He paused. What I can tell you is that when one person does something that clearly and irrefutably demonstrates a gap in the way we operate, it creates an opening. Whether we walk through the opening depends on whether there are enough people in positions of authority who want to. He looked at her. Right now, I think there are. She nodded. Thank you, sir, she said. He stood. She stood. He extended his hand again. The Marine Corps is better for having you in it, Sergeant, he said. I'd like it to start acting like it knows that. She shook his hand. She walked out. In the corridor, she stood still for a moment. She thought about the report she had built over 22 days. The yellow tabs, the map of Black Ridge Valley with its perfect killing corridor and its ridgelines marked in red. The morning of the convoy departure, the radio erupting, the climb. She thought about all the rooms she had walked into with something true in her hands and had the truth dismissed. She thought about the one room where Garrison had stood up and said, the failure belongs to me. She thought about Reynolds saying, put in the application. She thought about Stokes saying, the Marine Corps is better for having you in it. She thought about Earl Carter on the hood of his truck. You see things, Livy. She thought about 12 people she hadn't been able to save and 468 she had. She thought about the medic's cousin's second vehicle called from the staging point to say he was okay. She thought about all of it in about 6 seconds, which is how the mind works when something has settled. It moves fast over the whole of it, touching each part briefly, accounting for it, acknowledging it, putting it in its place. Then she straightened. She started walking back toward the unit area. Webb fell into step beside her from somewhere she hadn't noticed him waiting, because Webb was always where he needed to be. How'd it go, he said. They're reviewing the sniper school rejections, she said. Webb stopped walking. She kept walking. He caught up in 3 steps. Are you serious, he said. General Stokes, she said. He told you that directly. He told me the door is going to be looked at again. That's, Webb started, stopped, started again. Liv, that's, I know, she said. If you get in, Marcus. I'm just saying, I know what you're saying. She kept walking. Don't make it big yet. It's not done yet. Okay, he said. She looked at him sideways. You said it again. It's still true, he said. They walked in the Arizona afternoon, 2 Marines moving through the ordinary geography of a base that had seen extraordinary things 9 days ago and was now doing the work of absorbing it the way the body absorbs a wound, slowly with effort, replacing what was damaged with something that was never quite the same but was functional, was real, was still standing. Olivia Carter walked and thought about the application she was going to write. She had written 2 of them before. She knew the format, she knew the language, she knew what they wanted and how to present what she had and how to make the case for herself in the institutional language that institutions understand. This time she thought the case would be somewhat easier to make. She thought about what she would put in the additional qualifications section. She thought about Black Ridge Valley, 6 positions, 20 minutes, 1,200 meters. She thought about what she knew, and she kept moving forward, which was the only direction she had ever known. The application took her 4 days to write, not because she didn't know what to say. She knew exactly what to say. She had known what to say for years, had rehearsed the language of it in her head. During the 2 previous rejections, had built and rebuilt the argument for herself in quiet hours, when she was honest about what she wanted and why she wanted it. The 4 days were because she wanted to say it right. Not persuasively. She had made the mistake in the first 2 applications of writing persuasively, of constructing an argument designed to convince people who were predisposed against the conclusion. This time she wrote differently. She wrote factually. She wrote with the same methodology she had used to build the Black Ridge Valley threat assessment evidence sequence pattern conclusion. She let the record speak, and she annotated the record with precision, and she did not editorialize, and she did not apologize, and she did not soften a single thing. On the 4th day, she read the completed application through twice. Then she handed it to Webb. He read it standing up, leaning against the wall of the equipment room, where this whole thing had started 3 weeks earlier, and he read it slowly and carefully, the way she had taught him to read terrain, with everything engaged. When he finished, he looked up at her. This is the best thing you've ever written, he said. It's an application, she said. I know what it is. He handed it back. Send it. She sent on it. The waiting was the part nobody tells you about. People talk about the doing, the decision, the action, the consequence, but the waiting that comes after the consequence is its own particular endurance event. And Olivia moved through it the way she moved through everything, which was by focusing on what was directly in front of her and refusing to give significant mental energy to outcomes she could not control. Her administrative restriction lifted 12 days after the board. She returned to regular duties. She ran her route at 05:30 every morning. She worked, she functioned, she carried what she carried without letting it show in ways that would make other people have to manage their reaction to her, which she had always considered a form of respect. What she could not entirely control was the ongoing public dimension of the story. The articles had multiplied. 3 major publications had run pieces on the Black Ridge Valley engagement. 2 of them had quoted sources within the regiment, unnamed, careful, but clearly people who had been present. One had obtained a copy of the original threat assessment report through channels that Patel had spent 2 days trying to identify without success. Olivia had read each article once and then put them away. The detail that appeared in every single piece, the detail that no one seemed able to leave out, was the 2 previous rejections from sniper school. Written alongside the 6 positions, the 20 minutes, the 1-200-meter shots, the number of Marines who made it out of the valley, the detail landed like a specific kind of charge. That the institution had twice said no to this person, and this person had gone anyway and done the thing the institution trained people to do better than anyone they'd actually admitted. She had not given anyone that detail, but it was in her service record, and service records, like all documents, had the capacity to travel when people wanted them to. Captain Whitmore requested a meeting with her on the 17th day. She had not spoken to him since the board. She had seen him in the way you see people on a base where everyone occupies the same geography at a distance in passing and peripheral vision. He had not sought contact, and she had not sought contact, and that had been a workable arrangement. His request came through proper channels formally worded with a suggested time and a room number. She confirmed through the same channels. She told nobody about it in advance, not even Webb. The room was a standard meeting room. Nothing formal about it. Whitmore was already there when she arrived, standing by the window with his arms at his sides. Not crossed, not in his pockets. Just at his sides, which was its own kind of statement about how he was choosing to enter, whatever this was. He looked older than he had 3 weeks ago. Not dramatically, not the way people age in films visibly overnight, but around the eyes and some quality of the way he held himself. Something had shifted toward weight. "Sergeant Carter," he said. "Sir?" "Sit down." He sat. She sat. He looked at the table for a moment. "I'm not good at this," he said. She waited. "I'm not going to pretend to be good at this," he said. "I've been trying to figure out for 3 weeks what to say to you, and I have not come up with anything that sounds right, so I'm going to say the thing that's true and let it be insufficient." She held herself very still. "I was wrong," he said, "about the report, about you, about the decision to dismiss what you brought me without verification." He paused. "I've been an officer for 14 years, and I have made mistakes, everyone does, but this one sits differently because the cost of it was other people's lives and it was preventable." He stopped, started again. "I don't know how to make that right. I don't think it can be made right, but I needed to say it to you directly." The room was very quiet. Olivia looked at him. She looked at the quality of what was in his face, the discomfort, the effort it had taken to sit in this room and say these words, the specific courage it required for a person whose authority had failed to stand in front of the person that failure had most directly affected and say so without qualification. She thought about what she wanted to say. She said, "Sir, I accept that." He looked at her. "I'm not saying I agree with every decision you made," she said carefully. "I'm saying I believe you mean what you just told me, and I accept it. That's what I have." He nodded slowly. Something in his posture changed fractional, almost invisible, but she was good at reading the small physical language of people under pressure. "The report you wrote," he said, "the 22 days you spent building it. I've read it 3 more times since the board." "Sir." "The methodology," he said, "the way you cross-reference the drone imagery with historical data. The pattern recognition from the engagement database." He paused. "Where did you learn to do that?" The question surprised her. Not because it was hostile, it wasn't, but because it was genuine. He actually wanted to know. "My grandfather," she said, "and then practice, and then more practice." He nodded. "I'd like to request that methodology be formalized," he said, "written up as a training framework for threat assessment in complex terrain, with your name on it." She held the surprise off her face. Sir, she said. That's not charity, he said quickly, like he wanted to stop that interpretation before it started. He paused. It should exist. It should be teachable, and you're the person who built it. She thought about it. I'll write it up, she said. Good. He looked at her for a moment longer, then he stood. She stood. He extended his hand and she shook it, and the handshake was brief and firm, and carried in it the compressed weight of everything that had and hadn't been said. She walked out. In the corridor, she stopped and stood for a moment, not because she was overwhelmed, but because she had learned to give significant moments their actual size before moving on. This was a significant moment. She gave it its size, then she moved on. Webb was at the end of the corridor. She was going to ask him if he had been following her, but the truth was that after 17 years of combined military service between the two of them, they had developed the kind of coordination that didn't require communication. And Webb being at the end of the corridor where she would emerge from a difficult meeting was less surveillance than it was the natural expression of someone who paid attention. Whitmore, he said. He apologized. Webb's eyebrows moved. What did he say exactly? He said he was wrong. He said he dismissed the report without verification, and the cost was other people's lives, and it was preventable. Webb was quiet for a moment. Did he mean it? He said. Yes, she said. He meant it. Webb nodded. He also asked me to write up the threat assessment methodology as a training framework, she said. Webb stopped walking. With your name on it. That's what he said? Webb started walking again. He said nothing for about 20 steps. Then he said Earl Carter. She looked at him. Your grandfather, he said. He taught you the methodology. His name should be in there too. She felt something move through her kitchen. Yeah, she said. It should. The sniper school notification arrived on a Thursday morning, 5 weeks and 2 days after the board. Not through official channels first. That was the thing that would always be slightly strange about it in her memory. It didn't come as the formal letter that both of her rejections had come as. It came as a phone call at 07:15 to her unit area routed through the base communication system to the desk where she happened to be sitting because she was doing administrative work on the threat assessment methodology framework that she had been writing for the last week and a half. She picked up the phone. Sergeant Carter. Sergeant Carter, this is Lieutenant Colonel Yvette Chambers. I'm the Deputy Commandant for training at the Marine Scout Sniper School. Olivia set down her pen. Yes, ma'am, she said. I'm calling to inform you that your application for the Scout Sniper Basic Course has been reviewed and approved. Chambers said, you are provisionally accepted into the next class, which begins in approximately 8 weeks. The office around her continued to exist in its normal way. Papers on desks. The sound of someone's keyboard, 2 rooms over the particular ambient frequency of a building full of people working. All of it continued normally. Olivia felt the call land in her body the way large things land, not as a single sensation, but as a wave moving from the chest outward, taking a moment to complete itself. Ma'am, she said, say again, please. Chambers repeated it. Exactly the same words clearly and precisely, which told Olivia that Chambers understood the weight of what she was saying and was giving her the space to hear it properly. Provisionally accepted, Olivia said. Provisionally, Chambers confirmed. Full acceptance is contingent on the physical and skills assessment in the first week of training, as it is for all candidates. You will be evaluated on the same standards as every other candidate in the class. A brief pause. I want to be clear about that, Sergeant Carter. This is not a courtesy acceptance. You will earn your qualification the same way every qualified scout sniper earns it in the field on the range and under pressure. Ma'am, Olivia said, I wouldn't want it any other way. A brief pause on Chambers' end, something in the quality of it, suggested that answer had landed well. Report date and complete instructions will be transmitted through official channels today, Chambers said. Congratulations, Sergeant Carter. Thank you, ma'am. The line disconnected. Olivia sat with the phone receiver still in her hand for about 4 seconds. Then she put it down. She picked up her pen. She looked at the threat assessment methodology document open on the desk in front of her. 12 pages still growing the systematic articulation of everything Earl Carter had taught her in the hills east of Salinas, translated into language that could be taught to other people in other hills before other valleys became killing corridors. She wrote 2 more paragraphs. Then she picked up the phone and called Webb. He answered immediately the way he always answered when it was her. What happened, he said. He could hear it in her voice already. She knew after 18 months of working together he could read her vocal tone the way she could read terrain. "I'm in," she said. Silence. "Webb." "I heard you," he said. His voice had gone slightly rough around the edges. "I heard you, Liv." 8 weeks, she said. 8 weeks, he repeated. "Same standards as everyone else," she said. "Obviously," he said. "Obviously same standards." She heard him exhale, long and slow. "Your grandfather," he said. "Yeah," she said. "You should go somewhere quiet and sit with that for a minute," he said, "before the day gets complicated." She hadn't thought about that. She thought about it now. "Yeah," she said. "I'll do that." She went outside. She found a spot on the eastern side of the base where the building shadow kept the worst of the morning heat away, and she sat down with her back against the wall and her boots flat on the ground, and she let herself have the moment completely. She thought about Earl Carter. She thought about being 7 years old on the hood of his truck, squinting at hills she didn't know how to read yet, learning the difference between what's there and what you see. She thought about the patience of him, the way he never once made her feel stupid for not seeing it, yet never made her feel like the seeing was anything other than a skill she was in the process of acquiring as learnable as anything else, if you paid the right kind of attention. She thought about being 16 holding his hand in the hospital, the specific quality of his eyes in that final day. "You see things, Livy, don't let anyone tell you that you don't." She had not let them. They had tried, not all of them. Not Aguila, not Webb, not Reynolds, not Stokes, not even Garrison when it came to the moment of honesty. But the system had tried in the impersonal institutional way that systems try to contain what doesn't fit neatly into their existing categories. And she had resisted that containment, not with rage, but with the steady, patient, methodical insistence of someone who knew the difference between being difficult and being right. She had been both. She was willing to own both. Difficulty was the price the world charged for people who saw things clearly and wouldn't pretend otherwise. She sat in the building shadow for 12 minutes by her watch. Then she got up, dusted off her uniform, and went back inside. She had a methodology framework to finish. The 8 weeks before sniper school were the busiest of her career at that point, which was saying something given that her career had not previously featured slow periods. She finished the threat assessment framework. It went through 2 rounds of review, one from Patel, who checked it for anything that might create legal or institutional complications, and one from Garrison, who read it with the careful attention of someone doing genuine quality assessment rather than official obligation. Garrison made 3 suggestions. She incorporated 2 of them. The third she declined with a written explanation, and he sent back a response that said, "Noted, your reasoning is sound. Keep it as you have it." That exchange, the ease of it, the professionalism was itself a measure of how much the post-board landscape had changed in the relationship between Olivia Carter and the chain of command that had failed her. Change did not mean fixed. She was not naive about that. The formal reprimand was still in her record and would affect her promotion path in ways that were real and not trivial. The structural issues that had allowed her report to be dismissed, the informal hierarchy that determined whose analysis got taken seriously, those did not dissolve because a general had visited and expressed intent. Change in institutions moved slowly and sometimes moved backward and sometimes only appeared to move while actually staying still. She knew all of that. She was also going to sniper school. Both things were true simultaneously, which was how most important things were. The night before she left for school, Aguila came to find her. He was in his full uniform, not field kit dress, which was not what she expected, and she stood up from the bench where she'd been going through her gear when she saw him out of instinct more than protocol. "First Sergeant," she said. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He sat beside her, not across from her, which was not the normal geometry of a superior and a subordinate. He was quiet for a moment. "I've been in this corps for 32 years, he said, which was the same opening he had used in the equipment room 6 weeks ago, but the context was different now, and the weight of the words had shifted. "I have known a lot of Marines, good ones and bad ones, and the complicated ones in between that don't sort easily." He looked at his hands. "In 32 years, I have sent 2 people into a situation where I knew they were right and the institution was wrong, and I gave them the space to act on what they knew." She waited. "You're the second," he said. "The first was 19 years ago in a situation I am not going to describe to you tonight. The outcome was not as clean as yours." He paused. What I learned from it, what I'm still learning from it, is that there is a specific kind of person who can carry the weight of being right when the institution is wrong. Not everyone can. Most people, when the institution says you're seeing shadows, eventually start to believe it. They sand down the edges of what they see to fit what they're allowed to see. He looked at her. You didn't do that. She said nothing. Don't do it at school either, he said. They're going to push you hard, harder than the other candidates, because that's what happens to people who arrive with a story already attached to them. Some of them will be testing whether you earned it. Some of them will be testing whether you know you earned it. He held her gaze. Both tests have the same answer. She nodded slowly. Yes, First Sergeant, she said. He stood. She stood. He extended his hand. 32 years, he said, and I'm proud to have known you, Sergeant Carter. She shook his hand. She didn't have words for that. She didn't try to find them. Some things were complete without words. He left. She went back to her gear. She thought about all of it, the 22 days building the report, the operations room and Whitmore's laughter, the climb in the Arizona heat, the 6 positions in the 7 rounds, and the voices on the radio, the board and Garrison standing up, Reynolds and Stokes, and the one-page reprimand and the phone call on Thursday morning, and she let the whole of it move through her mind one final time, not to relive it, but to account for it, to make sure she was carrying it consciously and not just dragging it behind her without knowing it was there. 12 dead. She held that number. She would hold it for the rest of her life, and she knew it, and she chose it because they deserved to be held. 468. She held that too. Both. Always both. The school was exactly what Chambers had promised. The first week was a physical and skills assessment that was designed to be brutal, not as hazing, but as information. Here is the baseline of what you bring, here is where the gaps are, here is the work ahead. Olivia moved through it with the focused efficiency of someone who had been preparing for this in various forms for most of her adult life. There were 11 other candidates in the class, 9 men, 1 other woman, and Olivia. 2 of them had served longer than her. 3 were younger. And all of them were genuinely good at what they did, which was the only thing she cared about in the candidates around her, not their demographics, not their histories, just whether they were serious about the work. They were. The other woman in the class was Sergeant First Class Danielle Reyes from El Paso, 7 years, in the kind of physically precise person who made every movement look premeditated. She found Olivia on the second evening and said without preamble, Black Ridge Valley. Yeah, Olivia said. I followed the story, Reyes said. I applied for this school twice. They said I was too assertive. Olivia looked at her. What's your terrain raid like? Olivia said. Reyes almost smiled. Good. Then you're fine, Olivia said. What happened between them after that was not exactly friendship. The school was not a place that left much room for the leisurely development of friendship, but it was something real and mutual. The specific bond of 2 people who are doing hard work alongside each other and trust each other to do it without either of them needing to say so. On the 41st day, the final range assessment, Olivia lay in a position she had prepared for 3 hours and looked through her scope at a series of targets at ranges between 900 and 1,300 meters, and she breathed the way Earl Carter had taught her to breathe, and she found the stillness. The way Earl Carter had taught her to find it, and she pulled the trigger, the way years of practice had taught her to pull it, and every shot went where she sent it. When she came off the range officer, a master gunnery sergeant named Tomas Reyes, who was no relation to Danielle and had the specific face of someone who had seen everything and was no longer surprised by most of it, looked at her score sheet and then looked at her. Outstanding, he said, 1 word. The same word Aguila had said in the boardroom 6 weeks ago, with the same quality of held restraint, the same sense of something that had been waiting to be said, finally finding its moment. She received her qualification on a Friday afternoon, the same day as 3 other candidates who had made it through the full course. There was a brief ceremony because the school ran a culture of understatement, of letting the work speak for itself without theatrical amplification. Colonel Reynolds had come. She hadn't expected that. He stood in the back during the ceremony, and when it was over, he shook her hand and said nothing except, "Well done, Sergeant Carter." 3 words. Enough. Webb had driven 4 hours to be there. He stood outside the ceremony building after it ended And when she came out, he looked at her at the qualification patch at her face and he said, "Okay." She laughed. It was the first time she had laughed fully in almost 2 months. It came out before she could moderate it, and it sounded like itself, not performed, not careful, just real. Just the specific sound of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just set it down long enough to breathe. "You've been waiting for that moment," she said. "Since day one, Ibrahim," he said. "I've been saving it." She shook her head. She was still smiling. She looked at the patch on her uniform. Scout Sniper. The same qualification that 2 separate review boards had decided she wasn't right for. The same qualification that required exactly the qualities that had been documented as her professional liabilities. The independence, the refusal to defer, the insistence on trusting what she saw over what she was told to see. She thought about the first rejection letter, the polite, brief language of it. Too independent, too stubborn, too willing to challenge authority. She thought about Black Ridge Valley. She thought about what those qualities pointed in the right direction at the right moment in the right hands actually meant. She thought about Earl Carter one more time on the hood of his truck, pointing at hills she was learning to read. "Tell me what you see." She knew now with the completeness that only comes from having paid the full price for knowing something exactly what she saw. She saw terrain. She saw danger before it moved. She saw the shape of ambushes in satellite imagery and in the geometry of landscape and in the pattern of shadows that changed between one drone sweep and the next. She saw things that other people learned over time to unsee because seeing them was uncomfortable, because seeing them clearly meant sometimes standing in a room full of laughing men and refusing to sit down. She saw all of it. She had always seen all of it. And on the day it mattered most on the morning, 480 Marines drove into the canyon that should have ended all of them. Sergeant Olivia Carter had done the only thing she had ever known how to do. She had trusted what she saw. She had picked up her rifle, and she had walked toward the fire.